Hey everyone, it's Paula again, and we are back with the next lesson, and I'm going to talk a little bit around the area of risk management and liability about common sources of risk and also some myths that surround this whole idea of myths. Now, the next slide is a yellow slide for a reason. I highlight anything I really want to draw your attention to. So first of all, this section, this is a whole area that's very specialized in the world of not-for-profit insurance and law. And I really want you to understand that this is a broad brush, general kind of overview of this, and that it's very important that I'm not giving you any kind of legal advice. And that's more than just a disclaimer to protect me. I really want you to understand that to do a good job of this, you need the advice of insurance professionals and potentially legal professionals in terms of understanding where risk mitigation comes from. And so absolutely important that you understand what your laws are in your particular jurisdiction, provincial, state, federal laws, municipal laws, and to make sure that you are creating strategies which address anything that exposes you to the potential of liability. So it's a specialized area, and we need support and assistance beyond these videos to be able to create a really top-notch risk management plan. And by all means, take your risk management plan when it's complete, both the board side and the operational side, and take it to your insurance professionals or take it to legal counsel. It is absolutely worth a little bit that you might pay to have an expert review it and say, this is something that we can do. Now, there are also consultants and trainers far smarter and far wiser than I do that consult in this area. So if you're a large organization or you're providing services or programs that are really potentially high probability, high impact, then I would really encourage you to plunk down a few dollars and have someone who has expertise in helping you build your risk management plan and mitigate the risk to avoid liability. So very important that we take this on seriously. Now, I'm all about making my stuff better, and so I have an invitation. If you are part of the risk management, risk mitigation, risk assessment community, and you have some stuff that you would like to offer me by way of advice or guidance or feedback, I am more than willing to hear that from you, and please send me an email to Paula MacLean at Learning for Leaders. And I take positive feedback as well, but if you have some critique, if it's constructive, please don't tell me what not to do, tell me what I should do to improve it. If you have documents or advice that you'd like to see me post to our Facebook groups or our Facebook page, then I would really welcome those as well. So let's dive in now to the potential sources of risk in organizations. So the first area is operational risk that associates with doing the work that the organization does. And this included in that then is who does the work, and that's the people. So that can be in a number of different areas. You see the list. It's services, administrative work, human resources work. By the way, that's one of the biggest risks. We get sued for wrongful dismissal more often than any other particular risk area. So this is a biggie. Having good policies and doing risk planning around your HR policies is absolutely critical. Financial management policies and practices. So we have a number of areas that are operations related. Then on that same theme are our facilities, our buildings, our property, our land, and property also includes any equipment or vehicles or any other things that you might own or rent or lease that are part of the nature of the work that you undertake. Whether you use it once a year or you use it once a day, it doesn't matter. If it's equipment or property related, there's a risk associated with that. The third area is financial. Now, I'm not talking about record keeping so much as I am talking about revenue streams, how you manage debt if you have any of it, how do you invest your equity, your cash on hand, and what are the systems that are used to manage that process. So this is key, and this does overlap into the board's world in terms of governance, because the whole area of ensuring, trusting but verifying that this part of the organization is well managed is really important. Engage your auditors at this stage when you're creating the financial risk management strategies, and have them educate you on what are some of the areas that they see, and they will tell you tales of woe about previous clients that they have done audit work with. They know from coast to coast to coast the stuff that happens to auditors, with auditors, that relate to risks and finances. So the fourth one then is reputation. So this is all about our goodwill that we have in the community, our status, the confidence that funders and donors have in what we do and how we do it, and then finally the satisfaction of users and employees in the organization. So those are our four general areas of risk. Now you can probably put 200 bullet points after each one of those. So once again, the business of setting priorities is the business of assessing, managing risk, and making sure that we mitigate the liability to the degree that is possible. All right, let's just go through some myths then. Myth number one is that if you have insurance, you've done all you need to do to manage risks. And I've actually had people say in board meetings and in senior management meetings, well, we have insurance, right? And it's kind of a very casual, or we're bonded, right? Or we have errors and omissions insurance, or we have whatever. We have director's liability insurance. And so we think, okay, now we're protected. So there's a few things we need to look at, however, is that we need both. We need risk management and insurance. Insurance does not mean we have managed the risk, okay? And many insurance policies will be very reluctant or will refuse to pay out if you have not done the things that are reasonable to anticipate and make sure that the risk is mitigated. So really important then that we need an active ongoing management practice that actually assesses the major risks and places strategies to minimize them. And then we also need insurance, okay? So, and this includes insurance in a number of different areas. My recommendation to you is always have a once annual review of your insurance policy at a board level. You can do a mind down specific operational review, but make sure that your board is educated about the insurance that you cover. Make sure they have a chance to answer questions of the insurance professionals, not the executive director or finance director, and make sure that the insurance professional that's there is seasoned and knows the world of not-for-profit risk management. So don't pick the newbie who just joined the firm. Make sure you have somebody who's senior in the company who has some experience doing that. Myth number two then relates to board members and our volunteers, so they really have no liability. Well, it turns out that volunteers and paid staff are pretty much the same in the eyes of the law when it comes to liability. There is a little bit of difference in as much as a volunteer can be not seen to have the same expertise as an employee should have, but the reality is that they are both liable, and we want to make sure that volunteers in our service delivery areas as well as volunteers on our board understand their own liability. And this is where the insurance piece does come into play and is very, very important, because if something happens, we in fact indemnify, fancy word, and we usually hold or save harmless our board members, which means we hold them harmless because we have insurance. We wrap a cloak around them and say, if something bad happens and you've done your best, whatever best is in the eyes of the law, then the organization through its insurer will actually pay for the cost of legal representation and the cost of any settlement that might come out from that. So board members have three basic duties. We've talked about these, but we have the duty of care, also called the duty of diligence. We have the duty to be obedient. That means we follow the rules and laws and bylaws and governance policies. And then we have the duty of loyalty. And we're going to talk more about those in our next module, but the duty of loyalty relates to the fact that we put our own self-interest and self-dealings behind the best interest of the organization. So we need to make sure that our board understands that those are important duties, hence a module that we devote partially to that, but also that they fulfill those duties and understand that that's their responsibility. If they do that, it mitigates the risk. It doesn't eliminate it, but it helps reduce the risk that they may be exposed to. All right, myth number three is that having liability insurance protects board members from liability. it's kind of a misnomer. If liability insurance doesn't protect you from liability, what does it protect you from? It protects you from financial loss in the event, in the hopefully unlikely event that you are found liable for something that didn't happen or did happen that wasn't right or proper. So liability insurance protects board members from financial loss and protects the organization from financial loss in two areas: legal representation and any settlement or award that comes from a lawsuit that is successfully taken up against the organization, the board, or individual members. Myth number 4 then is that if a board member votes against a motion, or they abstain from voting from a motion, or they subsequently resign after a motion is approved that they didn't agree with, then they in fact are no longer liable. And here's the problem, is that it's simply not true, is that every board member should vote with their conscience, and they should vote according to their knowledge and their skill and their own good judgment. If that means you voted against a motion, highly recommending that you would have that vote recorded, meaning this many in favor, this many against, this many abstaining. And if you want your name recorded as being either in favor, abstaining, or against a particular motion, then that's entirely appropriate as well. It makes it very clear, if this ends up in a judicial process, that you in fact did not support that motion, spoke against that motion, argued your point, and you lost. And that's entirely fine. So it's really unlikely that voting against something, however, or abstaining or resigning after the fact is going to change the consequence of a decision, and it is likely not going to weigh heavily if this is brought before a court. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and there will be individual circumstances, so the lawyers and the legal beagles that are watching this video will say, oh, that's not really true, Paula. Well, it's kind of true. It's not true in all circumstances, and I agree. So if you have something better for me, then just send me a note. But the reality is that the organization is not just individually liable, they are collectively liable. And so what we need to know is that we don't want to go down that path. Do our jobs well, make sure that we are conscientious in how we do our due diligence, do research, ask questions, go online, find information, and that is a better protection, frankly, than $2 million or $5 million of comprehensive general liability or director's liability insurance. Now, in most provinces and states, boards are held jointly and severally liable. So they're individually liable for the actions they take, and they're also liable together. So when I said earlier that this is a complex area of law, if that doesn't make any sense to you, that's okay. That's why we have lawyers. That's why we have insurance professionals. But just remind yourself that just voting differently is not necessarily going to change either a negative outcome or the potential liability for the organization. Myth number 5 then is that the ultimate authority of the organization is the board, and the board can make any decision they want and do it in any way that they deem necessary. Now, here's the reality. The reality is that the board is legally bound by legislation and statutes. Statutes are the things, the regulations in addition to the legislation. And then secondly, they're bound by the bylaws and the written and approved governance policies of the organization. Let me tell you a story. An organization I was doing some consulting work with, small agency in a small rural community in Alberta, Canada, was in the process of struggling with their executive director, and there was kind of a palace coup. A group of staff got together and they confronted her, and they had a big meeting that I facilitated, and then they had another meeting, and none of those went particularly well. And then finally this group, who was still unhappy with the decision that was made by the executive director, wrote a grievance letter to the board. And about 3 weeks after that grievance letter was written, I got a call from the chair of the board and saying, can you come out again? And I said, absolutely I can, what's up? And his response was, well, they wrote a letter to the board, and we just decided that this was it wasn't right. This is all just a witch hunt. We don't like it. This is led by a bad apple bunch of people who are poisoning the attitudes of the employees in the organization, so we decided not to respond to it. Well, of course, they had a policy that gave access by employees or people who lived and worked in the organization that required the board to respond. There was a grievance policy in place, and the staff had followed pretty close to the right way of getting to the board. They tried to resolve the issue informally, then they'd had another meeting and tried to resolve it formally, and then they'd written to the board. And the board just decided, hey, doesn't matter if we have a governance policy that says we have to handle grievances, we don't like it, so we're not going to do it. And the staff at that point in time, when he called me, were ready to walk off the job, which would have had devastating effects to the people in service who needed supervision on a day-by-day basis in order to do their jobs. So this was a dire situation caused by an organization whose board said, we're the ultimate authority, we don't have to do anything we don't want to do. Not a good plan. You are bound by your governance policies. If you don't like a governance policy, you can change them by approving a motion to change them. I wouldn't, by the way, remove your grievance policy so that you don't have to deal with it, which this board would have been probably pretty inclined to do. We fixed it up. 2 or 3 more trips for me to come and meet with the board and sort things out and work with the staff team, found a resolution that was going to work for everybody, and recreated peace inside the organization without too much difficulty. It took about a year. But many of you have walked down that path of, staff insurrection, employees being really disgruntled. No, this is a very, very difficult time in the life of an organization. All right, so what I'd like you to do is to talk about the 5 myths. This is your turn learning assignment. And do they exist in your organization? Have a conversation about the points that I made with the 5 myths. And then my next question is, what further education for board members and senior management do you think would benefit all of you in terms of understanding the details around risk management and liability for your organization? So that's the end of this lesson, and I hope you'll follow along and grab me on the next lesson, which is going to talk about those 3 fiduciary duties that we touched on in this lesson. Take care.